It's time to cover the build review for the Axial SCX10iii. Is this a difficult build? Stay tuned and find out. Hey everyone, Rich here from the rcnetwork.com, and today we are covering the build review of the brand new Axial SCX10iii. Now, of course, this is Axial's newest 1/10 scale 4-wheel drive electric scale truck. Now, you may notice that there is a body missing. Typically in my build reviews, I do everything that's included inside the box. However, with this body for the Jeep Rubicon JLU, I decided to not include it in the build review because there are so many parts that go onto that body, and it would just be a shame to have to bolt everything to the body and then unbolt it to actually paint it. So in this build review, we'll be covering everything from the chassis down and going over some very good information to help you build your own SCX10iii. In this build review, we'll be going over several topics, including tools needed to assemble your SCX10iii, supplement items to make your build go even better, parts left over from the kit thus far, how exactly the owner's manual was, everything that you'll need to actually get this kit up and running with electronics and other items, and finally my overall thoughts of the kit thus far. As with all of my videos, if you see an item that you would like more information on, down in the video description, I'll have links to every item mentioned in this video. Tools needed to assemble your SCX10iii is a 2.0 and 1.5 hex wrench, a 7.0 nut driver, specifically the Techno version of shock shaft pliers, a good sharp hobby knife, and finally a set of needle nose pliers. Supplement tools that I would recommend is a good power driver with a adjustable clutch and a 1.5 and 2.0 hex driver from MIP. But I'll have more about using a power driver later in this video on specific plastics. Supplement items that came inside of the kit was some 35 weight shock oil. I got 2 tubes of it, although I only needed about half a tube to fill my shocks, some black grease, and some thread lock. Supplement fluids that make the build go even easier is some good old-fashioned chapstick for all of the chassis links, and finally some O-ring grease for the shocks. I used Avid Slop for mine. Parts left over from the kit thus far. On the far left-hand side, you do have the large lipo tray. I ended up using the shorty size and the screws to mount this in. Starting at the top, you do have the servo savers for the micro servos. You do have the attachment for the 2-speed right here. I opted not to install the 2-speed option in my SCX10iii. You do have the bolts to mount in all of the micro servos. You do have a little filler for the radio box. You do have the 2 metal horns. These are cast aluminum or cast steel. Not sure, but they're definitely cast. Both 23 and 25 tooth. You do have a motor pinion and motor bolts. Finally, some 3M tape, and you do get a cross or T-wrench with your build. 2 bags that I have not opened yet is bag J, which includes all of the interior and exterior features of the body, and also some body mounting posts for the concealed body mounts. So that is everything that's in this bag right here. And then also the spare parts bag, which has all the additional body mounts if you choose not to use the JLU body, and also some clips and other little bits and pieces for spare parts. Jumping over to the owner's manual, the SCX10iii's owner's manual is very well laid out, and I've got to say a huge improvement over the Capras. Now, the Capras was basically like the Apollo 13 of owner's manuals. Things just went wrong. They fixed it very quickly, but I think the SCX10iii's is a great improvement. Starting with, they actually give you 1-to-1 dimensions on all of the hardware now. If you remember on the Capra, they were slightly off and they weren't quite 1-to-1 dimensions. They had the model numbers, but you had to measure out everything on your own. Also, in the SCX10iii's, they explain things a lot better. This spacer in the Capra's owner's manual was just there, and it didn't really tell you what it was for. You had to kind of guess it was for the lockout, for the shifting mechanism for the transmission. Now, as we dive into the chassis, I will refer back to the owner's manual from time to time to point out things that I've highlighted in my classic yellow highlighter in my owner's manual, and we'll kind of jump back and forth as we go through the steps on the owner's manual. Starting with bag A, we go over the brand new portal axles, the AR45s. Now, what's really cool is they actually use the machined hardened gear set on the differentials, so you have the top quality products, and it's using a 6-bolt design that we saw later down the line. It's also a separate locker, so this is some pretty cool stuff inside the kit. Now, the front portal is actually an offset portal, so the pumpkin sits over to the driver's side of the vehicle, whereas the rear is actually a centered pumpkin. So back to the front, it uses two different sizes of universals which are included in the kit. The driver's side is this teeny tiny one, and of course on the passenger side you do get the lengthened one, so everything fits perfectly. Now, one thing to note on the portal box covers, they're actually labeled 1 and 2. One goes on the front and it has just an extra crown at the top of the top bearing race, where the number 2 does not include that. So be sure to mark those in your owner's manual and make that adjustment as you're building your kit. I actually messed up and had to go back and fix that situation. Looking at the centered pumpkin in the rear, there's also that missing bearing, or not so missing. Just like the Capra, the upper spot in the portal box has a place for a bearing, although one is not needed or included in the kit. So just don't make that mistake of dropping bearings in there because you don't need them. Moving on to the shocks, these are the improved shocks that we saw back in the Capra, just a little bit shorter. Now these do include those 2 O-rings on the cartridge, and I definitely recommend adding in some O-ring grease just to make sure everything is moving as smoothly as possible. Taking a look at the transmission, it is huge and it's a big undertaking to actually assemble this thing. So definitely polish up on your reading, read through the entire owner's manual of the transmission just to acquaint yourself with how it's going to go together. Also, take inventory of all of your parts. I had everything included in my transmission. However, when I had everything buttoned up, I had one little bearing just sitting there looking at me after I put the last screw in. I had to kind of go back through to see where I missed a bearing. There's quite a few bearings, quite a few different gearings, and none of the gearings actually have any labels on them. So get out your Sharpie, mark a gear tooth, and start counting. There's a lot of teeth. Make sure you put the right gear in the right place. Now, looking at the transmission, this thing is huge. It measures in at 5 inches in length from the top of the motor plate all the way back to where the rear drive shaft attaches. So it's quite a large transmission, and it's divided into about 4 different sections. Now, starting up here, you do have a very similar situation as the Capra, a very small steel spur gear and slipper clutch that's kind of built in to this front section of it. As we go down, we drop into the section that houses the 2-speed transmission. Now, I opted to not include the 2-speed shifter, so I have the shifter little rod there, but no actuator for the servo. So I'm not going to install a 2-speed because I am installing a brushless censored motor. Now, there is a small section in between the spur gear and going down to the 2-speed transmission that mentions switching a couple of gears up that are not included in the kit. Now, switching those 2 gears, you would actually be geared better for non-portal axles. So that might be something that might be available down the road from Axial. We'll have to wait and see. Now, moving further down, you do have what resembles a transfer case, and then finally you do have the dig section of the transmission. Now, I have installed this to operate a dig through a servo that's not included, and this thing will be functioning as my dig. So I'll have that feature of either locking or freewheeling the rear wheels, and we'll have some fun out there on the rocks. Now, one thing about the 2 features, the dig and the 2-speed, you can have the option of not using them. Kind of like what I did with the 2-speed. I have this just sitting here to where I'm only have it as a first gear option. Now, as far as the dig, you can also do the same thing. You can just have it as full-time 4-wheel drive and just have it like a regular SCX10iii or SCX10iii. Either way, you do have plenty of options this transmission to make it the way you want it. Now, a couple of things in the owner's manual for the transmission. It's a pretty complicated situation, and I just want to mention a couple of things that kind of bobbled me. Now, one thing is all of the gearing isn't labeled on the actual part, and they don't list it on the 1-to-1 section right here, so you can't kind of match it up. You have to go back and start counting teeth. Now, some of the gears are obviously identifiable, but a couple of them are hard to tell. You kind of have to double check your counts. Now, as you're building the transfer case section, or what resembles the transfer case section, there's two different sizes of bearings. There's actually a 511-4 up here on the top and a 510-4 here on the bottom. I kind of mismatched a couple of these, and I had to make note later on when I figured out I had messed up. Now, the one bearing I forgot to put in was this one down here on the final step of the transmission. So it was easily to find when I started disassembling, but nonetheless, I did forget to put that one in. So make a note of that when you're building. Now, one of the biggest pain in the ass features when building this SCX10iii are these two little nuts right here. They sit in little housings and they're ready for the motor mount to come down and tag into that, but they're actually placed on the inside of this housing where the spur gear cover sits. Now, you have to install the nuts first and then flip it around and place it into the actual housing and put all of these screws in to secure everything in. Now, as you're maneuvering around and screwing those screws in, these little nuts just fall out. That's just what happens. So I did this once, and I went ahead and threw some grease in there to hold the nut in there. Another advice from Rich over at Horizon was to actually put a dab of CA glue in there just to hold it in place as you screw these screws in and keep everything working right. Last thing on the transmission, or actually the motor mount, is it is a dial it up motor mount. You actually position the screws into whatever tooth pinion you're using, and I've never personally liked these. I've had several issues with ones in the past, not so much the Axial ones, but other brands. I'm never a fan of these. I wish they would just have the regular slide it motor mount where you slide it in and set your pinion mesh properly. For the second time, we've now seen the stainless steel links that appeared in the Capra. We now have them in the SCX10iii now. I absolutely love these links. These are probably one of the best links to assemble on any RC that I've seen before. So good job, Horizon. A couple of things to note on the links: they are not traditional scalar style of links. They do have right hand thread and left hand thread. One's denoted by the little indentation right here on the link, very similar to racing turnbuckles. So one way you will turn it on righty tighty, the other one is lefty tighty. So as you're assembling them, you kind of can tell the difference there. Now, I was very nervous at building these because there were several different options for rod ends, and of course you have those great stainless steel pivot balls, but I was kind of nervous, so I laid everything out very meticulously, and I just started building them to where it was just an assembly line. And showing you right here, it is so easy to assemble these links. They just go on so smoothly. There's nothing that you have to do to prep them, and I just add a little bit of chapstick to it to make everything work out perfect. Now, one thing to note on the pan hard bar, it's of course a much different size of stainless steel link. It has a little bend into it right there, and it's actually designed to fit around the oil pan of the bottom of the motor mount, so it actually fits in there quite perfectly. It's hard to see the description on the actual owner's manual as to which way it has to bend, but if you just follow the owner's manual, it actually kind of extends out this way. If you really look at it, and of course it was late at night when I was building this thing, I had a 3D look at this thing to where it almost looked like it was bending the opposite way. So just make note of that when you are assembling this thing, and you can kind of match it up to the bottom of the oil pan just to make sure you got it right. Moving on to the skid plate and the upper links, they actually have replaceable upper link mounts, which is pretty cool. Now, they are labeled 1 and 2, and just make note of that when you are assembling. The ones go on the left hand side, but not so much left hand side right here, but on the front link, this is also a number 1 that goes on the left hand side as you're mounting it. So this is the only number 2, and that's just on the passenger side on the upper rear link mount. Now, as you're screwing in those replaceable link mounts, it's kind of hard to follow in the owner's manual, as you have both of these screws kind of dialing into one of these holes. This is the only one that actually shows it correctly. So the shorter screw, the AXA114, actually goes in the bottom section, where it's hard to tell on these two. So just make a note of that. Now, one thing to note about all of the shock towers, all 4 of them, or the shock hoops, they're actually made of a very rigid plastic, almost like it has a lot more fiberglass in it. So as you start to screw into those items, it is recommended that you use a hand driver, no power drill on these particular items. So if you're screwing this screw through here into that fiberglass reinforced plastic, it is recommended to do it by hand. And also, you may want to tap into it slightly with a tap, and then also use some black grease on the screw to make it all go in. You'll know what I'm talking about when you start assembling it, but just make a note of that as well. Another great feature of the Axial SCX10iii are the adjustable slider rails. Now these are adjustable, so you can adjust your wheelbase by adding additional links, most likely just the rears. Now one thing that is difficult to assemble on this thing is these little floorboards right here get screwed into the chassis rails, both of them, and then into the skid plate. So it's a little bit difficult to actually maneuver that procedure as you're going into one item, two items, three items, and then finally into the fourth item right here with that one little screw. One last thing on mounting the shocks. The first thing is right here, this little exclamation point. This is an 18 mil screw that goes next to the servo. If you're not careful and you put a 20 mil in there, it will go into your servo, so be careful of that. All the other screws are using the 20 mil option, and that is for the passenger front and both of the rears. Driver front, you do have to use that 18 mil screw. Now the other thing that was a little bit unsure of in the manual is it looks like the shocks are actually mounting on the inside hole of the rear link mount, or where the mounts to the axle. It actually goes in the outside hole. I had to reference further down in the magazine in the owner's manual to find this out. In this particular illustration, it shows it going on the inside of the closer to the pumpkin for the shock, and the outside for the link, which is not true. If you look further down, it is the opposite way. So once again, shocks go to the outside, links go to the inside. All right, so my overall thoughts on the SCX10iii. I love this thing. It is so refreshing to build something that is ground up new from Axial. Now, I think what was mentioned before was the HD wild bore drive shafts, and possibly the ring and pinion are the only things that are identical to the old version. This thing is completely new, and I really like all of the effort that went into this thing. The transmission is somewhat of a bear to build. If you pay attention to the owner's manual, it's pretty easy to lay it out. I made a couple of bobbles, mostly because I was under pressure to get it all done and also get everything assembled correctly. So it was late at night too. So anyways, but they did a lot of effort into this build, and I definitely appreciate it. Now, a couple of things that are just standing out as I have it here on the bench. It is so smooth. The suspension is just so smooth and it just glides. It's like butter almost. And as you roll it back and forth, now I don't have a motor installed, but this thing is so smooth and it's quiet. With all of those gears maneuvering in the transmission, you can't hear too many of them at all. So it's a nice feature of this scale truck. Another great feature is this kind of LS looking motor that they've included in the price of the kit, which is really nice. It actually bolts up here to the top body mounts, and it just continues over with a little air cleaner. You have all of the belts and pulleys right here. It's just a nice piece, and you can easily get into your motor if you need to, just by removing these two screws. Another great feature of the SCX10iii are the inner fenders. These things are nice. Now everyone kind of says, you know, TRX4. Well, the TRX4s are, you know, they come in two different widths. These resemble the narrower of the two from the TRX4. Now these are a little bit thinner material, which is definitely appreciated. Keeps the weight down, and I do like the flexibility of these versus the TRX4s. Another great feature are these new Nitto Trail Grappler MTs, the mud terrains. Now these are definitely a taller and wider tire than a lot of people are used to, but these are pretty much the standard for your 4.75 inch tall, 1.9 inch tires. Now the overall grip of these things, they are pretty grippy. I believe these are the 35 compound, either the G or the R. I can't remember the name of the compound, but these are the grippier of the two, and they feel pretty good overall. Now they do come with an open cell foam and of course the KMC machete style beadlock wheel. They are plastic, satin finish right here on the outside, and on the inside you do have the 12mm hooks and a 6-bolt pattern right here for the actual beadlock. So these install pretty easily just with a power driver. Doing a quick comparison in size, the Nitto right here, 4.74. You do have the Hyrax right here from Proline Racing. You also have the BFG Crawler from Proline, and finally the J Concepts Landmine. So you can kind of see here, they're all very similar in size, and I think this will make a great improvement to the stock SCX10. Another great feature of the SCX10iii are the hidden body mounts. Now up here on the front, you just have this little attachment that goes on the side of the rail, and it just houses for the female section of the body mount. The male section actually mounts to the body, mounts into these two sections right here. And if we look on the rear side, it's very similar to the front as well. You have two more holes right there. Everything mounts up nicely. Finally, the kit includes two options for battery mounting. Now I opted for the side mounted shorty pack version right here. And these are just two wings that mount onto the same center section. They only give you one hook and loop strap, but there's also an option for a rear section, and that goes right back here on the rear wheel wells, the rear inner fenders. It mounts up there just with the two included screws. You swap the battery strap over, and now you can mount a regular size stick pack, which is pretty nice. So you just built your chassis here and you need to outfit it with some electronics. Here's some items that you will need: a 540 sized motor and electronic speed control, up to a 4-channel radio system and receiver, a steering servo, a 2S or 3S LiPo battery, and either 1 or 2 micro servos depending on how you set up your transmission. Well guys, that is my build review of the brand new Axial SCX10iii. I cannot wait to get some electronics in this thing, get some paint on the body, finish that thing up, and show you in the final reveal video how everything came together. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this particular kit. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What's the best feature you like about it? What's something you hate about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section. Also, be sure to like this video. It gets it out to more and more people. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and click the notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload a video. And finally, my name is Rich. Thanks for watching.